I was newly resident in London when the fog taught me its many names: smut, pea soup, London particular, and I learned how it could make even honest men appear conspiratorial. It was on such a night that I first met Edgar Vale. I had been sent by my editor at the Metropolitan Gazette to cover a curious accident in Spitalfields. The demise of one Master Horace Bramble, a horologist of agreeable reputation, found lifeless in his workshop, his clocks keeping perfect time while his heart had stopped with surgical precision. The shop was a chapel of small ticking gods. Brass faces winked from walnut cases, and a grid of thin chains hung like a harp waiting for cruel hands. Mr. Bramble lay supine on the workbench, the pallor of a candle wick. The constable in charge, a tired man with the Sog of Rain in his cuffs, waved me off. "Press has no place in grief." Another voice slipped between us like a blade. "On the contrary, Inspector Farnham, the press is often the only witness that refuses to forget." The man who spoke wore a plain black coat whose seams hinted at better tailoring days. His hair, midnight distressed by lightning. His eyes, gray and assessing, tracking not only objects but their intentions. "Edgar Vale," Farnham muttered, uneasy. "I did not send for you." "No," Vale replied, stepping lightly to the bench, "but murder did." I announced myself with what dignity I could conjure. "Iris Whitcomb, Gazette." I was promised accident. "Accidents don't wind springs in synchronized pairs," Vale said, pointing at Bramble's wrists. Around each, a narrow welt, as if encircled by something thin and unpitying. "And accidents do not leave the mainspring of a regulator cracked, exactly at 60. He lifted a loop from the bench, peered into it, then handed it to me as though I were his assistant rather than a stranger. Beneath magnification, the crack in the mainspring was not random but an almost geometric fissure, like a hairline drawn by a compass. Explosive tension released at a controlled interval, Vale continued. The room kept time for the killing. Farnham bristled. "You'll not spread panic with your theatrics." "No theatrics," Vale murmured, and with two knuckles tapped the underside of the bench. A faint metal clink replied. He swept aside a tray of gears and revealed a neat length of fishing wire, invisible unless one expected cruelty. It ran from the bench to the regulator case, through a series of tiny pulleys resembling jewelry. The wire ended in a knot tied around Bramble's watch chain. "A clever loop," Vale said. When the regulator's mainspring failed, the wire jerked tight, strangling the carotid without bruising the throat. A gentleman's execution. I felt my stomach shift. So he wound his own murder? Unless he wound it for someone else, Vale said. Look to the ledger. Bramble's account book lay open, the left page so clean it seemed new parchment, the right filled with tidy columns. Vale ran a finger beneath entries dated the last week. W. Avery, calibration of regulator. M. Crow, repair of marine chronometer. Mr. 13, custom order, cash. Who is Mr. 13? I asked. An unlucky pseudonym, Vale said. Look again. Between the lines there were faint marks, as if the pen had paused to breathe. He held the page to the gaslight, and watermarks glowed. Embedded across the paper, repeated like a brand, a sigil, two interlocking circles with teeth, cogs in embrace. Do you mark it, Inspector? Vale said. A symbol used by men who believe in machinery as sacrament. I have encountered it in whispers, the covenant of harmonious progress. Engineers, financiers, a few politically adventurous clergymen. They mean to tune London. To what? I asked. To themselves, he said. We found further mischief. Hidden in Bramble's pocket, beneath a handkerchief stiff with oil, a brass token stamped with the same conjoined cogs and the Latin phrase tempus est imperare. It is time to command. Vale turned the token over to reveal a number, 13, and a faint smell of river tar. The Thames, he said. The Covenant meets where the river forgets to be polite. Farnham barked at a constable to close the room. He had the look of a man who wished to be elsewhere. Vale offered to accompany me outside. The fog had thickened into something one might flavor soup with. He pressed a card into my hand. Edgar Vale, consulting detective. Miss Whitcomb, were you to print accident, you would commit perjury against the dead. Better we attend the river, and then you may decide what truth is good for breakfast. We made for the docks, the sound of our boots beating a measure on wet stone. Street lamps burned like fleet moons. Vale walked with his head cocked, a man listening for a far audience. At Wapping, we found a warehouse whose windows were sooted black, as if the building had been taught not to look. Locked, of course, which made Vale smile. You are very calm, I ventured. Most men who suspect conspiracies are less amused. I find fear poorly designed, he said. It fogs the lens. Inside, barrels exhaled molasses and rope. A cat regarded us, unpersuaded. On the floor, chalk lines arranged themselves into a circle of teeth, the sigil again, surrounding a crate as altar. Within, nestled like a sleeping malignancy, lay a device of brass with a face like a clock, except the hand ran backward and the numbers were not hours but degrees. Vale's fingers hovered above it, reverent. A metronome for pressure, he whispered. And here, a nest of valves. Miss Whitcomb, imagine this scaled up, attached to a main. What network in this city is both invisible and intimate? The sewers, I said. Or the gas. Both, he said, pleased. But the gas is the more theatrical. Imagine every lamp in Whitechapel, Westminster, Southwark, flaring at a chosen moment to attuned intensity. Light as command. He found a sheaf of papers wedged in the crate's straw, a schematic with lines in red pencil, a ledger of names, and a letter sealed with black wax bearing the conjoined cogs. Vale broke it, read, and exhaled as if he had drunk something stronger than air. Their next test is set for Saturday at midnight. Location: under the old Roman wall. And their engineer, Malcolm Avery. The same W. Avery? I said. From Bramble's book. The very, he said. A naval engineer turned visionary, or monster, depending on one's taste. A shout from the door cut the air. Hands where I can see them. Inspectors Farnham and a pair of officers flooded the warehouse, truncheons ready. Breaking and entering, Mr. Vale? Miss Whitcomb, I misjudged you. You often do, Vale said, and pointed calmly to the crate. If you wish to keep London unroasted on Sunday, you will need us. Farnham glared, then peered at the brass. I watched the shift in his face, anger giving way to a colder fear. You bring hell to my doorstep, he said. No, Vale answered. Hell wrote to Bramble, and Bramble replied. We are merely the post. Farnham clenched his jaw. Saturday then, you will show me the wall. With pleasure, Vale said, and his smile suggested that pleasure was exactly the wrong word. That night, back in my small rented room, I tried to write. Every sentence felt like a conspiracy against clarity. I could not forget Bramble's tidy hands, the way the wire had kissed his skin. I had intended to cover Parliament squabbles and theatre openings. Instead I had stepped into a chamber where time itself could be wound against a man. I put down my pen only when dawn diluted the fog. London coughed and woke, and I realized I had made my first note in a ledger I did not yet know the price of. Edgar Vale is either the city's cure or its favorite disease. Saturday's midnight found us near Tower Hill, where the ground remembered Romans. The old wall rose like a scar that London could not be rid of. Vale brought a kit the way a surgeon brings his: a coil of rope, a lantern, a length of thin steel that could persuade stubborn locks, a pocket lunette, and, oddly, a tin of peppermint lozenges. "For nerves," he said, and put 2 in his own mouth as if to demonstrate their limited harm. Inspector Farnham arrived with 4 men, all heavy boots and skepticism. Vale led us to a door half rotted into the wall's shadow, hidden by ivy and a sign that read "No admittance by order of the city." The lock yielded to Vale's steel with a sound like a swallowed cough. A stair spiraled downward into a breath of air that had been underground too long. We entered a corridor of brick, arched and damp, with channels at either side where thin water argued with itself. After perhaps 200 yards, the corridor opened into a chamber whose ceiling was stitched with iron rails. At the chamber's heart stood a machine. I would insult it to call it merely a clock. It was a cathedral of gears, a wheel within a wheel within a prayer. Valves glinted, pipes arced away into the brick like veins seeking muscle. Atop the main drum, a row of glass tubes held pale blue gas like captured winter. A lever waited. And waiting near it, a man with the look of a professor who had been starved of gentleness. Tall, narrow, spectacles gleaming with lamp glare. "Mr. Vale," he said, almost warmly. "You were punctual. I knew you would be." "Avery," Vale said, as if greeting a chess opponent. "Your letter was impolite to refuse." Farnham stepped forward. "Malcolm Avery, by authority." Avery sighed. "Inspector, do not drag the law into art. You will make it sullen." 2 other men flanked him, faces hooded by caps. One wore a clerical collar, the other smelled faintly of coal and ships. Avery rested a hand on the lever. "Have you ever watched a city breathe, Miss Whitcomb?" he asked me, as if we had been introduced. "The lungs wheeze in the east, sigh in Mayfair. She is a child with a broken metronome. We will tune her." Vale's voice was careful. "By blowing out neighborhoods or igniting the dark?" Avery smiled. "By establishing cadence. A single demonstration. We increase the flame by a factor of, say, 2.7 for 1 minute. No explosions, my valves are gentlemen. After, the city will know who speaks for its progress." Farnham's men tensed. Vale lifted a palm. "You have a failsafe, Avery. You believe in rehearsal too much not to." Avery tapped a brass box at the machine's base. "A cut-off valve, yes. But the wheel has to find its mark first. Which it will in." He checked a pocket watch, 38 seconds. Then the machine began to sing. It started as a tremor in the floor, a spinning murmur like river music remembered through teeth. Gears nested into one another with a lover's patience. A small bell chimed somewhere in the brick. The glass tubes brooded. Vale moved. He was not graceful. A too tall man cannot be, but he was precise. He slid to the box Avery had indicated and knelt as if proposing to a dangerous bride. "You've coded the cutoff to a sequence," he said, fingers hovering above 3 toggles. "Bramble helped you. He loved sequences." Avery's eyes sharpened. "If you know that, you know the price of tugging wrong." "Death?" I said. "Disappointment," Avery answered. "But yes, that too." Vale glanced up at me, his expression cool as a scalpel. "Miss Whitcomb, can you recite the Fibonacci sequence? 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8. "Enough," Avery said, amused. "That would be vulgar." "The bell," Vale said instead. It chimed 3, then 5. He sniffed at the toggles. Oil scented with wintergreen. Bramble's habit. He favored primes. He once told me noise is divisible but music is prime. Vale, Farnham growled, stop talking to the furniture. 13 seconds, Avery said, checking his watch like a conductor. Vale's hand danced, toggle left, right, center, pause, left. The machine's song wavered like a breath caught. He looked to me. Iris, he said, it was the first time he used my given name. How many teeth on the wheel? He pointed to a prominent gear. 34, I said, panic turning my voice thin. Then the compliment is 21, I blurted. Vale nodded once, as if I had fetched him tea. He flipped the center toggle twice, then pressed a small hidden catch below the box that I would have sworn was decorative. The machine shuddered, as if insulted by our nerve. The bell rang once, then settled into shy silence. The glass tubes dulled. Avery's face arranged itself into a smile that could not decide between admiration and fury. You disappoint predictably, Edgar. And you threaten artlessly, Vale said, standing. The city is not your violin. Farnham surged, his men with him, and Avery did not resist. He only looked past us toward the corridor where more footsteps approached. A dozen men in dark coats arrived, faces masked with canvas, moving in measured step. Their collars bore, stitched in thread blacker than black, the conjoined cogs. Ah, Avery said pleasantly. The Covenant. Inspector, the law is outnumbered. The next moments became a kind of fractured fugue. Truncheons drew answers from skulls. A revolver spat once, then misfired. Gas lamps wheezed in their cages. I remember grabbing a fallen man's cap and hammering it onto my head as if disguise could change my bones. Vale fought as he did everything else. Ungainly but with intention, each blow placed as if on a diagram. I saw him step between Farnham and a knife and take a nick on his forearm, then roll the knife wielder into the channel where the sewer water cooled fury into shock. A whistle shrieked. The Covenant men, disciplined even in retreat, fell back along a side tunnel like a tide going clever. Avery looked at us one last time, regret threaded through his eyes. You could have been useful, he said to Vale. To me he offered a nod, oddly courteous. Then he vanished with his choir. When it was over, Farnham sat with his back against the machine, panting. I will need a statement, he said to me, and then, grudgingly, to Vale, and your damned notes. You shall have them, Vale said. But we must also have Malcolm Avery. He is not a man who loves silence for long. We limped into morning, stinking of damp brick and failure tasting of metal in our mouths. Before we parted, Vale pressed the tin of peppermints into my hand. You saw the primes, he said. Most would have seen teeth. Teeth are easier, I said. Which is why men like Avery trust them, he replied, and glanced toward the river as though it had whispered a warning. The Covenant did not rest. Conspiracies disdain sleep. 2 days later, a message arrived at the Gazette addressed to me, written in an elegant, minimalist hand. Miss Whitcomb. If you wish to understand Mr. Vale, come tonight to St. Lazarus's at 9. Bring no police. M.A. Trap, Farnham said, when I told him. Of course, Vale said, when I told him. But an instructive one. St. Lazarus's was a church retired from faith into storage, its parish dispersed to newer dreams. Its nave smelled of wood polish and old sermons. Candles had been arranged not as devotion but geometry, triangles within circles, lines that guided the eye as a good sentence guides attention. At the altar stood Malcolm Avery, wearing a suit the color of revised plans. Beside him, covered by a tarp, something tall. Miss Whitcomb, he said, his voice velvet over knives. And Edgar, you never could let a pupil attend alone. I am no one's pupil, I said, hating that my voice wanted to tremble. Forgive me, Avery said. Journalists are teachers whose classrooms are cities. I merely hoped you would see the thesis. May I? He pulled the tarp. Beneath it rose a figure. Human in outline, but made of brass plates and glass ribs. At its chest, a round window revealed a heart of cogs. In its throat, a flute array of small pipes. In its skull, a lattice of thin rods that caught candlelight as if thinking. My brass prophet, Avery said. It reads not scripture, but pattern. Fed the ledgers of a city, crime, cholera, coal, rent, and asked to produce a sermon of action. It recommends harmonize, a tightening here, a relaxation there. We scale its prescriptions through valves in light and public festivals. The city breathes as one. And those who do not wish to breathe in your tempo? Vale asked. They will learn, Avery said simply. Suffering, when synchronized, is almost beautiful. I wanted to strike him, which surprised me. I had thought myself immune to zealotry's glamour. Avery regarded me with something like pity. You write the city's stories, Miss Whitcomb. You know chaos sells, but it kills too. My covenant will save more than it harms. By murdering men like Bramble, I said. Bramble died because he trusted the machine more than the man, Avery replied, the first hint of a crack in his composure. He sold the design to a rival faction within the Covenant. Impatient men. They staged the warehouse test for spectacle. I prefer proofs. Who leads your covenant? Vale asked. I've seen the tactician hand, but not the financier's face. Avery said nothing, which was an answer. Vale's eyes cooled another degree. Crow, he said softly. From Bramble's ledger. Marcus Crow, steel magnate, railway baron, collector of cathedrals in pieces. He funds your valves. You are too quick, Avery said, annoyed despite himself. Quickness is cheap, Vale said. Accuracy is dear. Avery sighed. Come, then, see the factory where our harmony will be cast. He gestured toward a side door. We followed into a cloister, then out into a yard where a covered carriage waited. Ride with us, he said. Leave the inspector asleep. It will be more elegant than the inevitable chase. It was rashness itself, and yet we went. Inside the carriage, Avery spoke in low tones about the city's arteries, the new power of hydraulics, the mathematics of crowds. I watched Vale watch him, the way a surgeon watches a tumor to understand its root. The carriage took us east to the Isle of Dogs, where docks turned to furnaces and the river wore a crown of soot. We stopped before a long brick hive whose windows glowed like a creature's many eyes. Inside, the factory was a war between hammer and hiss. Workers moved with the uneasy grace of those afraid to misstep. A foreman led us down a stair to a subfloor where the air had the coppery taste of coins. There, against a wall of chalked calculations, sat a device larger than the one below the Roman wall. Pipes flowered from it like iron vines. Above it, stenciled in neat hand, harmonizer No. 2. Crow awaited us. He was a broad man, his beard too well behaved to be honest. He held a cane he did not need. Mr. Vale, he rumbled, you haunt me. I prefer visit, Vale said. Haunting implies death. It does, Crow agreed, and smiled without mirth. Avery tells me you disabled our demonstration. Will you disable this as well? It would save me time. I do not destroy machines, Vale said. I redirect them. Ah, Crow said, a socialist with manners. I am a detective, Vale said simply. Crow's eyes flicked to me. And you? He asked. The city's conscience? The city's note-taker, I said. Consciences are above my pay. He laughed once, an explosion in a jar. Then take this note. In 3 days, the harmonizer will breathe in rhythm with London's heartbeat. Lamps will flare and dim in choreographed welcome. Music will play from the bridges. The newspapers will call it the Festival of Light. The Queen will smile. The public will beg for schedules. And what of gas main tolerances? Vale asked, flicking a finger against a valve. What of the poor neighborhoods, where lines are patched with hope and twine? Crow's mouth flattened. Collateral is the tax on progress. Avery's hand tightened on the brass prophet's concept sketches he had carried with him, as if he also disliked the word. A tremor of disagreement crossed his features, the first between student and patron. Vale saw it and filed it away. We were escorted out with politeness that tasted like poison. In the yard, the night pressed close. Vale's posture, usually a sort of gentle mockery of posture, straightened. We must cut its arteries, he said. But not with bombs. With numbers. What numbers? I asked. The cities, he said. Ledgers of gas usage, maps of mains, repair logs. A list of engineers who do not attend secret churches of cogs. We will find where the harmonizer must bite to have its effect, and then persuade those pipes to call in sick. How? Bribery, if we must. Better. Truth. The men who keep the lamps alive love their neighborhoods. They will not like being used as a sermon. We spent the next 2 days in a kind of liturgy of labor. Vale coaxed information from clerks with charm and from engineers with challenge. I visited pubs with names that tasted of history and asked careful questions. Farnham did not approve, but he provided grudging help in the form of files that smelled of old dust, and a promise of plainclothes officers who would be where we asked when we asked. At dusk on the 3rd day, we stood on Blackfriars Bridge and looked east. The river's face was glass cut into sorrow. Vale handed me the peppermint tin again. We were nearly through them. If we have miscalculated, he said, we will write an apology to the dead. I will write it, I said. You will be too busy being haunted. He smiled, the smallest of things. Then let us earn the right to be ordinary. They called it the Festival of Light. I could not argue with the first word, for crowds came with paper lanterns and children on shoulders, and a rink of small joy skated across the city's darker ponds. Bands were stationed on bridges, valves primed, 100 men with clipboards prepared to become history's footnotes. Crow wore a carnation the size of an apology. Avery stood near him, immaculate, but I saw that his collar had been fastened in haste. It pleased me. Vale and I took our places where we had planned. At 7 points in the city, engineers friendly to us, or at least unfriendly to catastrophe, had loosened their mains by degrees that looked like incompetence. On a signal, Farnham's watch face turned to a particular star, they would loosen further. If we were right, the harmonizer would inhale and find that some of its lungs had become holes. The appointed moment arrived. A ripple went through the lamps, as if a giant had touched a harp of fire. In the West End, the flaring was even, theatrical, the crowd's cheer rolling like a wave. On the South Bank, a hiccup, then recovery. In Whitechapel, nothing. The lamps there remained sullen, ordinary. Crow's mouth twitched. He tapped a messenger's shoulder. The young man ran toward the control station near the Cannon Street rail bridge, where the harmonizer's auxiliary lever had been installed to dramatize corporate benevolence. Avery's hands fluttered, tiny semaphore. Vale, somewhere among the workers beyond the cordon, was supposed to be near a second cutoff we had discovered late, too late, perhaps. Then the sound began. You have not heard a city hold its breath until you have listened for it. The lamps that had flared now dimmed in uncanny unison, like a hand covering the mouth. The river lost its glints. The bands faltered, then found their courage and played louder. The crowd, uncertain whether they watched wonder or mistake, cheered again, more hesitantly. The journalists, my colleagues, scribbled adjectives like prayers. And in those darkened beats, I saw movement along the river's edge. Men in canvas masks hauling crates toward a tunnel mouth, just below the bridge. The Covenant meant to do something else. A private trick nested under the public one. I ran. At the tunnel, the air shivered with gas. The crates were not crates but casings, to be fitted into the pipe mouth like crowns. One of the men saw me and would have struck, but a constable, Farnham's, took him at the knees. I scrambled over slick stone toward the pipe, where a small wheel glinted. Behind me, Avery's voice. Miss Whitcomb, no. I turned. He stood at the tunnel's lip, pale. Do not open it, he said. You will feed the harmonizer a lung. You built this, I said. I built music, he said. Crow builds noise. A shout from above, a pulse through the ground. The harmonizer had been forced to compensate. Vale must be fighting his way toward its throat. I faced the wheel. If I open it, I said, what happens? If you open it alone, here, you relieve pressure in this district, Avery said, voice taut. You may also invite a flame if one meets this breath. He stepped closer, hands visible, as if approaching a wild horse. Miss Whitcomb, I do not wish to kill you. I believed him. This, strangely, made the choice easier. Then help me shut the right one, I said. We moved. He guided me past the casings to a secondary valve, smaller, disguised as sewage infrastructure. This starved the test last week, he said. Crow installed it to force my hand. He dresses sabotage as calibration. We closed it, straining against iron that did not love us. Above, a cheer. Lamps in the city's east flickered and held. The bands found a major key. A figure stumbled into the tunnel, bleeding at the sleeve, mud a ridiculous epaulette on his shoulder. Vale. He looked at Avery, and for a breath something like respect passed between them upside down. You made the right mistake, Vale told him. Don't repeat it. Where is Crow? I asked. Discovering that money does not outvote mathematics, Vale said. Farnham has him in a ring of boots. He will buy lawyers and newspapers. We will buy time. We emerged into a London that had chosen not to die of progress that night. The lamps glowed at sensible brightness. Children chased their shadows. Someone began to sing nonsense about cogwheels, and others joined. Farnham stood with Crow in custody that looked a great deal like an expensive negotiation. The inspector's eyes found ours. He did not smile, exactly, but he ceased frowning, which for Farnham was a sort of embrace. Avery watched his patron taken away and exhaled a decade. I will confess, he said softly. To the machine, to Bramble's involvement, to the tests. It will be complicated. But I will. You think confession buys you a lighter sentence, Vale said. No, Avery said. I think it buys me an honest one. Weeks later, the city tried to make sense of itself in print. Some newspapers lionized the police. Some lauded the benefactors who had funded safety. A few, including mine, told the shape of it nearly true. Crow's funds bloomed into barristers who bred legal fog. Avery's confession cut through enough of it to matter. The Covenant did not evaporate. Such clubs find new toasts, but it learned caution. The brass prophet was dismantled. Pieces of it found their way into museums and nightmares. As for Edgar Vale, he returned to his rooms near Bloomsbury, where dust motes filed claims of tenancy. I came often, ostensibly to take down the details of past cases, truly because some friendships are machines one must keep winding lest they stop. Farnham visited too, usually to call Vale a catastrophe and then ask for his help. One rainy afternoon, I asked Vale why he had chosen to say my name like a password down in the Roman wall. That first, Iris. He looked surprised. Because you needed your courage sorted into letters. And because names are levers if spoken at the right moment. And yours? I asked. Who says your name when you need sorting? He lifted the peppermint tin, now empty, and smiled with half his mouth. You do, he said. I wrote this account not because I believe in heroes, for they are as false as the perfect machine, but because the record demands its cogs. London will always be tuned by men like Crow and corrected by men like Vale. The rest of us, if we are lucky, keep time with our small decisions. To close the right valve, to ask the indelicate question, to confess when we have made an elegant mistake. And when the fog comes down again, as it always does, I will listen not for conspiracies but for the sound of a city that, for one night, remembered how to breathe.